My topic today is green building and sustainable cities. The subtopic within it, creating strategic synergies to foster green building. And what I'm taking a look at is the smaller scale of the actual construction of the buildings within a city and what role that plays or might play within the context of a global city, a sustainable city rather. In addition, what I will look at or talk about briefly is the fact that the area in which this work is done or was done is at the very local scale. So it's sort of part of the molecule of creating a sustainable city is involving not only the municipality, the region, the city municipality, but also the local and neighborhood scale. I will briefly discuss one community story in Northern California and go through how we went through the process to support and foster green building in our area, which then spread throughout the state of California. California Dreaming is what I've titled it because it started with a small group of people who wanted to develop further their expertise in green building. Some of the certification courses such as LEED were deemed too complicated to start with. So this group came together after a very short 4-day certification course to become professional green builders to start an ongoing educational course. And through a series of collaborations with different stakeholders, which I'll touch on, this then in 2007, this group was sort of quote unquote adopted by a nonprofit, Build It Green, which had started at the same time our group had. And that group used the work that we had done in creating a community and creating ongoing education to incorporate into their guidelines, which then a few years later were adopted by a number of municipalities in the state of California. So to give some credit to the main stakeholders, our waste management authority, which is called Alameda County Waste Management / Stop Waste, was a big instigator of the area of green building. They're the people, the group which hosted the green building certification course to begin with. And the reason for this is they were looking at ways to reduce their landfill. They were running out of landfill space, and they had identified construction as contributing 40% of the material in the landfill. Then the architectural and construction community is the group which started this small, initially very small educational forum which met monthly and spread throughout the immediate region and now has councils throughout the state. Business on a very immediate scale donated meeting space and over time supported various activities and events that we produced. And lastly, a separate nonprofit, Build It Green, formed, as I mentioned, and they created a series of councils. So we had our first council of builders and architects, and they created a series of other councils with which we worked: real estate, multifamily housing, tract housing where many homes are built at one time, things like that. So this is just noting that through this collaboration, we saw a very large increase in local expertise, an increase in the visibility of the green building arena, which thereby too increased market demand for green design and building. Lastly, this helped support the development of a strong community of stakeholders committed to implementing green design and building, which still is very strong today. And I want to mention that this was an all-volunteer effort, apart from the nonprofits who had some paid staff, but there was just a lot of enthusiasm and commitment to moving this forward and enlightened self-interest. People wanted to increase their competitive value in the marketplace, and there were a number of interests which combined together to support this effort. So just briefly, if we might wonder why green building might fit into sustainable city, my take on it is that the design and construction choices of buildings affects the environment, clearly. We can just look at landfill as one example, as well as, of course, the inhabitants' comfort, health, and well-being, which in my opinion should be part of a sustainable city as well. Second, since an estimated 50% of the world's population lives in cities and urban areas, clearly anything we do to impact that population will impact the things that we're trying to affect. And lastly, I would maintain that assigning value as a culture to green building, of course the other sustainable ventures too, supports the development of what I might call sustainability values, so that we need to be teaching ourselves and teaching each other and teaching our children and teaching our communities that these things matter and are worth the effort. Common definition of green building includes such 5 categories as this. I've taken this from the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED program, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, which has gone fairly global. And you can see that I have listed here sustainable site planning, safeguarding water and water efficiency, energy efficiency and renewable energy, conservation of materials and resources, and indoor environmental quality and health. People have already covered energy, but you will see a lot of attention, even at these smaller local scales, at energy efficiency, partly for reducing energy costs and the cost of living, also for energy costs and operating costs for municipal and commercial settings, of course human comfort, and first but not least, carbon footprint, which people have addressed. And so I've listed just possible stakeholders in this kind of volunteer sort of nonprofit, volunteer local community effort. Many of these groups listed here were involved in ours, and I could see that in different communities there might be just 2 that would come together, or 3. One does not need all of these to be involved, but of course the more that are involved, the better. I have this section called Green Building Measures. Really, this is more, I could say, this could be called benefits, because the idea is, with this kind of group, what we did was we took it as a platform for educating ourselves and educating others. But there's also a piece about inspiration, so that as we went through and learned and taught about green building, we also started to establish tangible benefits that we could help people, that we could use to help people understand why they might want to pursue this. In some cases it does cost more, in other cases it doesn't, at least at the first cost. In terms of this local effort, one of the tools that works really well is to create incentive systems. So we created awards, certification courses, and there was a fair amount of publicity around this, which meant that the businesses and groups involved in these activities really were able to leverage their contribution and their activity to greater visibility in the marketplace. In terms of green building, it's a, such a broad task, and construction as an industry tends to be fairly conservative because builders are responsible for what they build, and they're not going to always want to try something new that has not been tested. So it's important to establish a clear framework of what some of the options are, and also to test them. I haven't mentioned the testing, but part of the function of our group, in a way, was kind of a think tank, where we took different measures that had been suggested and we tried them, and we tested the epoxies, and we tried the different materials to see if they really worked in the field. Sometimes in our own homes. Those were the guinea pigs sometimes. I've already mentioned making it tangible here. I'll talk about that again in a second. More on the benefits. So another one of the benefits of green buildings is to discuss and to consider are the quote-unquote life cycle costs. So the first costs are those costs during construction, but the life cycle costs are the cost of operating the building over time. And many times those life cycle costs are reduced or greatly reduced by green building. And that's an important piece to take into account in any construction project, and especially, I would say, with a green building project. The last point is just noting that when a new chunk of information is being disseminated, it needs to be done in a way that is not too complicated. So we found it important to have ways to communicate about green building which provided a sort of mental framework that people could use, and over time that was able to get more complicated and intricate as people became accustomed to the landscape, as it were. I've mentioned a little bit about businesses and how they benefited from some of the increased visibility. And it actually was a very important piece in this program, as it were, to harness market forces, where, again, the concept of enlightened self-interest, where different stakeholders, including business, having come together, wanted to benefit. And part of that, providing that benefit, was simply creating more of a market for green building in the publicizing of this activity. There was a green home tour. Over time, it became so crowded it was sold out. So there was a lot of publicizing of this, which in the end did create a lot of, let's say, foot traffic and visibility for this activity and for people involved in it. So activities associated with publicizing and PR and all of that are very important to actually establishing green building, because it's a new, even if it's not new in a particular environment, it's still a conservative environment with the construction. Green community. So I have this in here because, again, at this community scale, which is part of this sort of organism of any of our sort of, let's say, national environments, without these things being implemented on a personal or community level, such as energy reduction, people have mentioned that a big part of addressing the climate change is energy efficiency, which at the end of the day is often implemented by individuals. So creating a green community, which includes not only the professionals, but also the, quote, end users, the building owners, the municipalities, the whole spectrum, is very important to maintaining a continuity with this movement, as it were. And all the activity around involving people, getting their feedback, and getting their sort of buy-in proved to be very important as time went on. I've just quickly listed some resources. I'm at the end here, and I'm sure many of you have already become familiar with some of these or your own more local ones, but the Leadership in Energy Environmental Design program through the USGBC. I show just the local nonprofit that I'm discussing. There's a British program that I'm not familiar with, but I found online, the Green Building Program. Estidame is a program that was started in Abu Dhabi. And then advocacy and education programs. So the World Green Building Council, the US EPA has a lot of great information. UN Habitat, and Vincent here can discuss that with you afterwards. Passive House movement started in Germany, very strong movement, very interesting, very high bar for energy efficiency. And the Rocky Mountain Institute.